October 14th is coming, and whether that date means anything cosmically or not isn't the point. The point is you clicked on this video right now in this moment because something in you knows you need to hear what I'm about to say. The urgency you feel around that date, use it. Use it to actually pay attention. Use it to listen closely. Because what I'm going to lay out for you has layers, and if you're only hearing the surface level, you're missing the teaching. This is going to dismantle the chosen one narrative completely. And if you're someone who's been consuming that content, who's been believing you're cosmically special, this message is time sensitive. Every day you spend in that fantasy is another day you're not doing the actual work that had set you free. Yesterday we went deep into karma and reincarnation, showing you the actual mechanics of how that system operates. Today we're taking what you learned there and applying it directly to this question millions of people are asking: am I chosen? If you've been watching videos about starseeds, chosen ones, special missions, stay with me. I'm going to map this out with precision, and I need you to listen for what's being said beneath what's being said. Toward the end, I'm going to give you an experiential checkpoint you can verify directly that shows the difference between spiritual fantasy and spiritual reality. This will challenge beliefs you've been holding. But what I'm offering in return is far more valuable than the comfort of feeling special. I'm offering you a clear view of the actual path to freedom. So use whatever urgency brought you here. Let it sharpen your attention, because this teaching has depth that reveals itself the more carefully you examine it. Let's begin. Every single day, dozens of channels release videos with nearly identical messages. You're special. You're chosen. You're a starseed. This is why people are jealous of you. This is your divine mission. This is what's been happening to you. The titles blur together. The thumbnails use the same visual language. The content recycles the same core narrative with superficial variations. And millions of people click because these videos offer something irresistible: significance without effort, spiritual status without attainment, cosmic importance without transformation. The blind leading the blind, and the reason it proliferates is simple. It feeds something primal in human psychology: the need to matter, the need to have a reason for suffering, for confusion, for the mediocrity of daily existence. But in a non-dual reality, in the genuine structure of consciousness and liberation, no one is chosen. Not in the way these videos present it. Not in the way that makes you cosmically special while you're scrolling through content at 2 a.m. looking for validation. The only sense in which anyone could be called chosen is if they've achieved something that 99.9% of people haven't achieved. And we're discussing verifiable, demonstrable spiritual attainment. Buddhahood. A fused state with the divine that doesn't fluctuate based on mood or circumstances. Consciousness so stable and expanded that you incarnate at will, meaning you're no longer subject to the unconscious wheel of death and rebirth that drives ordinary existence. If you're still caught in the wheel of reincarnation, if you're still being born and dying according to karmic propulsion rather than conscious choice, you are nowhere near chosen in any meaningful spiritual sense. Yesterday's video showed you exactly how that karmic mechanism functions, how actions leave imprints that drive future becoming. That wheel keeps turning for everyone who hasn't done the work to transcend it. And if you're watching YouTube videos to determine your spiritual status, you haven't achieved rigorous mountaintop samadhi. You haven't sat in meditation so deep and sustained that the structure of your consciousness permanently reorganized. You haven't dissolved the sense of separate self so completely that what remains is just clear awareness without center. None of this is harsh. This is liberating. The fantasy of being chosen keeps you from the real work. The chosen one narrative is comfortable. It affirms you're already special. You just need to recognize it. It frames your struggles as signs of significance. It interprets other people's jealousy or misunderstanding as proof of your elevated status. The genuine path of spiritual transformation operates exactly opposite. It doesn't confirm your specialness. It dismantles the one who wants to be special. It doesn't explain your struggles as cosmic mission. It shows you how you create most of your suffering through identification with thought and emotion. It doesn't separate you from others. It reveals separation itself as the fundamental illusion you're trying to wake up from. So what's actually happening with this flood of chosen one content saturating the internet? Understanding this requires looking at the spiritual marketplace as a system. YouTube algorithms reward content that generates engagement. Videos that make people feel special generate massive engagement. Someone watches, feels validated, comments, "This describes my life perfectly," shares it with like-minded communities. The algorithm sees this activity and promotes the video. Other creators notice what's getting views and produce similar content. The cycle amplifies. But underneath the economic mechanism is something deeper, a cultural wound. Western culture stripped away traditional religious frameworks without providing genuine spiritual education. People lost the myths and rituals that gave life meaning, but they didn't lose the need for meaning. The marketplace rushed in to fill that void. Chosen one content is cheap mythology. It gives you a story about who you are and why you matter. It provides a framework for interpreting your experience. It creates community with others who believe the same narrative, all without requiring the difficult work of actual transformation. The channels producing this content are mostly caught in the same trap as their audience. They believe what they're saying because believing it feels better than facing ordinary existence without cosmic significance. They recycle content from other channels that recycled it from somewhere else, and at the foundation is a fundamental misunderstanding of what spiritual realization actually involves. Scan through those comment sections. Look at what people say. "This is exactly what I needed to hear. This describes my life perfectly. I always knew I was different. This explains why people don't understand me." Every single person relates to it. Every single person thinks the description fits their unique experience. That fact alone should tell you something. When everyone is chosen, no one is chosen. When every description of the chosen one applies to every person who watches, you're describing the universal human experience of feeling alienated and wanting to matter, feeling different from others. That's being a conscious human capable of self-reflection. Every teenager feels misunderstood. Every person who thinks deeply feels somewhat alienated from mainstream culture. Every sensitive person struggles with the harshness of the world. None of that makes you chosen. It makes you human. Those videos that list all the signs, people are jealous of your energy. You've always felt like you don't belong. Negative people can't stand being around you. You're drawn to ancient wisdom. They describe experiences so broad and subjective that millions of people fit the description. Confirmation bias completes the trap. You remember times people seemed jealous and forget times they didn't. You focus on feeling different and ignore all the ways you're exactly like everyone else. You interpret your interest in spirituality as evidence of cosmic selection rather than ordinary human curiosity. What becomes clear when you step back from the narrative, every human being has the same fundamental nature, which is consciousness itself. Every human being has access to the same source. Every human being has the potential for complete awakening. And simultaneously, almost no one actualizes that potential because it requires something most people won't give. The work itself is demanding in ways that chosen one videos never mention. Think about what real spiritual attainment has actually required throughout history. The Buddha, 6 years of extreme ascetic practice followed by intensive meditation under the Bodhi tree until the illusion of separate self completely shattered. Tibetan yogis spending decades in mountain caves doing practices so rigorous that most modern people couldn't handle them for a single day. Christian mystics undergoing dark nights of the soul that stripped away every consolation, every certainty, every comfort. Does that resemble scrolling through videos that confirm your specialness? The path to genuine realization, to the kind of consciousness where you could legitimately be called chosen in the sense of transcending ordinary human limitation. That path destroys everything you think you are. It doesn't upgrade your identity. It obliterates it. You want to know what chosen actually means? Chosen is Milarepa, living in a cave eating nettles until his skin turned green, practicing Tumo and the 6 yogas of Naropa, until his consciousness stabilized in states most people can't imagine. Chosen is Ramana Maharshi, sitting in such deep samadhi that insects ate his flesh and he didn't move. Chosen is the Buddha, achieving such mastery over consciousness that he could recall every single lifetime, trace the entire chain of dependent origination, and see the mechanism of suffering and liberation with perfect clarity. That's chosen. That's what transcending the wheel of unconscious rebirth requires. That's the level of work needed to achieve stable realization, where you're no longer subject to ordinary laws of karmic causation. And if you're watching YouTube videos to determine if you're chosen, you haven't done that work. You haven't achieved that realization. You're still operating within the ordinary structure of ego consciousness, looking for ways to feel better about yourself within that structure. Can you feel the difference between wanting to be special and wanting liberation? Can you sense how these are opposite movements? One trying to inflate the ego, the other trying to dissolve it. Drop your honest thoughts below. Have you encountered this chosen one content? Has it appealed to you? And more importantly, can you recognize now what need it was meeting? The mechanism operating throughout all of this extends far beyond chosen one videos. This is the entire structure of spiritual materialism, the way seekers collect spiritual identities and concepts and experiences without any fundamental transformation of consciousness. Chögyam Trungpa coined that term, and it describes the process of using spiritual practice to strengthen the ego rather than dissolve it. The chosen one narrative represents spiritual materialism in its purest form. It gives you a spiritual identity that makes you special without requiring you to die to yourself. The ego loves this. The ego's entire function is maintaining your sense of being a separate self, and it will use anything, including spirituality, including non-dual teachings, including meditation, to strengthen that sense of separation disguised as spiritual progress. When you identify as a chosen one, you're not transcending the ego. You're giving it a promotion. You're taking the ordinary sense of I am someone and upgrading it to I am someone special, someone cosmically important, someone chosen for a divine mission. From the perspective of genuine non-dual realization, both positions are equally illusory. The ordinary person and the chosen one are both mental constructs. Both are movements within consciousness that have been mistaken for the totality of what you are. Real spiritual work doesn't add anything to you. It subtracts. It strips away every identity, every concept, every belief about who and what you are until all that remains is the awareness itself. Not your awareness, but awareness as such, the field in which all experience arises. That awareness doesn't belong to you. You belong to it. Or more accurately, the sense of you is a temporary appearance within it, like a wave appearing in the ocean. The wave isn't chosen. The wave isn't special. The wave is ocean temporarily appearing as wave, and when it recognizes its nature, it doesn't become a special wave. It recognizes it was always ocean. That's the fundamental teaching of non-duality, and it completely demolishes the chosen one narrative. In non-dual recognition, there is no separate self to be chosen. There is only consciousness appearing as the multiplicity of forms, and every form, every person, every creature, every phenomenon is equally an expression of that one consciousness. In the deepest sense, everyone is chosen because everyone is an expression of the divine. And simultaneously, no one is chosen because there's no separate individual to receive that chosenness. The only meaningful distinction is between those who recognize their nature and those who don't. Between those who've done the work to stabilize in that recognition and those who haven't. Between those who've transcended the wheel of unconscious becoming and those still spinning in it. And that distinction has nothing to do with cosmic selection. It comes down to effort, practice, grace, and the mysterious confluence of factors that leads to awakening. The Buddhist tradition maps this with precision. They distinguish between stream entry, once returner, non-returner, and arhat. In the Mahayana tradition, there are 10 bhumis, 10 levels of bodhisattva realization. In the Tibetan tradition, detailed maps exist showing how consciousness transforms through practice. All these maps make clear that real attainment is recognizable. It has characteristics. It produces specific capacities and freedoms, and it's rare. It requires dedication and practice that most people won't undertake. In the Tibetan tradition, they discuss achieving the rainbow body, the capacity to dissolve the physical body completely at death, leaving nothing but hair and nails. This is documented phenomenon, and the people who achieve it have typically spent decades in intensive practice. That's what chosen would mean if we're using the term to signify anything beyond ordinary human experience. Or examine the Hindu tradition. The state called Sahaja Samadhi, natural, permanent absorption in the self. Ramana Maharshi embodied this. His consciousness was so completely stabilized in awareness itself that there was no movement back into identification with body or mind, even while the body-mind continued functioning. That's liberation. That's transcendence of the wheel. That's the kind of realization where you could say someone has gone beyond ordinary human limitation. But even in that realization, there's no separate person who's been chosen. There's just consciousness recognizing itself, the self knowing itself as it always was. Ramana didn't claim to be special. When people came treating him as special, he'd point them back to their own nature. He'd say, I am that, you are that, all this is that. He wasn't collecting followers or building an identity as a chosen one. He was pointing to the truth that obliterates all such distinctions. That's the marker of real realization. It doesn't inflate. It doesn't separate. It doesn't create hierarchy in consciousness even while acknowledging different degrees of recognition and stability. The Buddha achieved complete enlightenment and then spent 45 years teaching, making clear that what he realized is available to anyone willing to walk the path. Consciousness is the fundamental nature of all beings. But walking the path, that's where the fantasy ends and the reality begins. The path requires morality. It requires ethics, not as arbitrary rules, but as the foundation of practice. You cannot stabilize in deep meditation if your life is chaos, if you're lying and stealing and causing harm. The mind won't settle. The energy won't purify. The consciousness won't clarify. This is why every genuine tradition begins with ethical foundation. The Buddhist Eightfold Path starts with right view and right intention. The yogic tradition starts with yama and niyama, restraints and observances. The Hermetic tradition taught by Hermes Trismegistus, who is Thoth and Tahuti, their latter incarnate, speaks of purification before illumination. The Chosen One narrative skips all of this. It tells you you're already special without requiring any character development, any ethical transformation, any purification of your life. And the path requires concentration, the ability to place your attention on a single object and keep it there, not for 5 minutes but for hours, not for one session but for years, until the mind becomes stable and pliable and capable of deeper work. Do you have that concentration? Can you sit for even 20 minutes without your mind scattering into thoughts about what you need to do later, what someone said yesterday, what you're going to eat for dinner? Most people cannot. They haven't trained their minds, and the training is gradual, systematic, demanding. The same practice, day after day, month after month, year after year, slowly building the capacity for sustained attention. The Chosen One narrative doesn't mention this. It doesn't discuss the thousands of hours of practice required to stabilize consciousness. It doesn't mention the boredom, the frustration, the countless times you'll want to quit. Beyond concentration, the path requires insight, direct seeing into the nature of reality. Not believing the right things, but perceiving directly how experience is constructed. Seeing impermanence in real time, seeing the absence of self in real time, seeing the nature of suffering and its cessation in real time. This is progressive deepening that transforms how consciousness operates at the most fundamental level. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition discusses the practices of generation stage and completion stage. Generation stage trains the mind to visualize and concentrate. Completion stage works directly with the energetic and consciousness structures of the body-mind, dissolving ordinary perception into recognition of emptiness and clear light. These practices are rigorous. They're precise. They require instruction from someone who's completed them. They take years of preliminary practice before you're even ready to begin them properly. And the result of these practices isn't becoming a special chosen person. The result is the illusion of being a person, special or otherwise, dissolving completely. The Hermetic tradition speaks of becoming Heru, achieving the state of the perfected one. And this perfection is the recognition that your individual ka, your life force, and your ba, your soul, were always expressions of the universal ka and ba, the divine force animating all existence. Every genuine tradition points to the same recognition. What you are is not the limited person you take yourself to be. But that recognition requires the dissolution of everything you're using to protect and maintain that limited identity. And that dissolution is the work. That's the price. That's why so few complete the path, even though the capacity is universal. The chosen one narrative gives you the conclusion without the process. It tells you you're already enlightened, you just need to remember. It tells you you're already divine, you just need to acknowledge it. It tells you you're already on a special mission, you just need to accept it. But recognition without transformation is just another belief. You can believe your consciousness itself while still being completely identified with your thoughts and emotions. You can believe you're divine while your behavior shows you're driven by fear and desire and reactivity like everyone else. Real realization shows up in how you live, in the stability of your consciousness under pressure, in your freedom from compulsive reactivity, in the quality of your presence, in your capacity to rest in awareness regardless of circumstances. If someone tells you they're enlightened but they're still obviously controlled by their emotions, still defensive when challenged, still seeking validation and status, they're not enlightened. They're identified with the concept of enlightenment, which is just another trap of the ego. And if you think you're a chosen one but your life still demonstrates the same patterns, same problems, same level of consciousness, then you've just adopted a flattering belief about yourself. This pattern repeats constantly across spiritual communities. People who've attended dozens of workshops, read hundreds of books, collected initiations from multiple teachers, had powerful spiritual experiences, and they're still anxious, still depressed, still reactive, still suffering in all the ordinary ways because none of that spiritual activity transformed the basic structure of their consciousness. The practices became additions to the ego rather than dissolutions of it. The experiences became memories to cherish rather than pointers to recognize. The teachings became beliefs to hold rather than investigations to pursue. The chosen one narrative is particularly insidious because it makes you feel like you're already at the destination. If you're chosen, if you're special, if you're on a divine mission, then you don't need to do the unglamorous work of transformation. You just need to accept your chosenness and wait for it to manifest. But consciousness doesn't operate that way. Karma doesn't operate that way. Liberation doesn't operate that way. Real spiritual progress looks like becoming more ordinary, not more special. It looks like your neurotic patterns gradually losing their charge. It looks like your mind becoming quieter and more stable. It looks like your reactions becoming less automatic. It looks like your capacity for presence and awareness increasing. These are the markers. Not cosmic mission, not special powers, not other people's jealousy. Just gradual, measurable transformation in the quality of your consciousness and the character of your life. And what's beautiful, once you let go of needing to be chosen, once you let go of the spiritual ego's demand for significance, the path becomes available. You can finally do the work without it being about proving something or achieving some status. You can practice for the sake of freedom itself, not for the sake of becoming someone special. That's when real transformation becomes possible, when the work is no longer about you. If what I'm saying is landing, if you're recognizing the difference between spiritual fantasy and the path itself, drop a like and leave a comment about what genuine spiritual progress has looked like in your own experience. Not what you believe or what you've read, but what you've directly observed in the quality of your consciousness. What has actually changed versus what you've just collected as identity? We need to address the question forming. If no one's chosen until they achieve these extraordinary states of realization, what's the point? Why practice at all? If Buddhahood is the standard, isn't that impossibly distant? Understanding becomes critical. A difference exists between the ultimate attainment and the path itself. The path is available right now. The path has nothing to do with becoming worthy of chosenness. The path is recognizing what's already true and allowing that recognition to transform how you live. In the Dzogchen tradition, they make a distinction between the ground, the path, and the fruition. The ground is your ultimate nature, already perfect, already complete, already fully enlightened. The fruition is the complete recognition and stabilization in that nature. And the path is the movement from apparent ignorance to recognition. The ground doesn't change. You don't become Buddha nature through practice. You already are Buddha nature. Practice just removes the obscurations that prevent recognition. In that sense, you could say everyone is chosen because everyone is fundamentally consciousness itself. But the recognition of that truth, the stabilization in it, the freedom that comes from it, that requires work. And this is why the chosen one narrative misleads so thoroughly. It conflates the ultimate truth that you are consciousness with the relative reality that you haven't recognized it, you haven't stabilized in it, and you're still suffering because of that lack of recognition. Telling people they're chosen without making this distinction just reinforces spiritual bypassing. It lets them use the ultimate truth to avoid the relative work. Yes, you are consciousness. Yes, you are divine. Yes, your fundamental nature is the same as Buddha, Christ, Krishna, any realized being you want to name. But relatively, phenomenally, in terms of your lived experience, you're still identified with thought. You're still reactive. You're still creating suffering. And that requires work to transform. And this brings us to what I promised earlier, the demonstration of what separates fantasy from reality. The way you can verify right now whether you're operating from recognition or just from belief. Let's do this together. Notice that you're aware. Don't try to create awareness. Just notice that experience is happening and that you know it's happening. That knowing, that awareness, where is it located? You might want to say it's in your head, in your brain, but check directly. Is awareness located somewhere? Or does it seem to be the space in which all experience, including the sensation of your head, appears? Notice that thoughts are appearing in awareness. Sounds are appearing in awareness. Sensations are appearing in awareness. But the awareness itself, can you find its boundaries? Can you find where it begins or ends? You can find the boundaries of your body. You can find the edge of a thought. But the awareness in which all of this appears, it's boundless. It has no location, no limit, no edge. Now notice this. That awareness doesn't come and go. Thoughts come and go. Emotions come and go. The body's sensations shift and change. Has there ever been a moment of your experience where awareness wasn't aware? Even when you're asleep and dreaming, awareness is present. Otherwise, you couldn't experience the dream. Even in deep sleep, awareness must be present. Otherwise, you couldn't wake up and say, I slept deeply or I had no dreams. Something was aware of that absence of experience. What you're recognizing right now, if you're looking directly and not just thinking about this, is your fundamental nature. This awareness that has no location, no boundaries, no beginning or end, that's always already present. This is what every tradition points to when discussing your ultimate nature. Whether called Buddha nature in the Buddhist tradition, Atman in the Vedantic tradition, or Shiva consciousness in Kashmir Shaivism, same recognition, different linguistic containers for what cannot be captured in language. Recognizing this once in a moment of quiet attention differs fundamentally from stabilizing in it. This recognition is the ground. You've seen the mountain you need to climb. Seeing it is essential. You can't climb a mountain you can't see, but seeing it differs from having climbed it. The work of the path is stabilizing this recognition until awareness of awareness becomes more constant than identification with thought. Until you're resting in this spacious presence even in the middle of activity, challenge, intensity. That stabilization, that's what separates someone who's intellectually understood non-duality from someone who's realized it. That's what separates belief from attainment. That's what separates spiritual identity from spiritual freedom. And that stabilization requires practice. It requires return again and again to this recognition. It requires catching yourself when you've collapsed back into identification with thought and gently returning to awareness itself. It requires building the capacity to remain as awareness, even when intense emotion arises, even when challenging circumstances occur. In the Tibetan tradition, they discuss recognizing the nature of mind, stabilizing that recognition, and then achieving complete confidence in it. 3 stages. Most people never get past the first. They recognize the nature of mind once, maybe in a retreat or a powerful moment, and then they spend years talking about that recognition without doing the work to stabilize it. The chosen one narrative operates at the level of the first recognition. It tells you you've seen the mountain. You're enlightened, you're special, you're chosen, but you haven't climbed anything. You're still at the base. The recognition is valuable, essential even, but it's the beginning of the work, not the completion of it. If you're stabilized in recognition of your nature as awareness, certain things become evident. Your suffering decreases dramatically because suffering requires identification. If you're resting as awareness itself, who's there to suffer? The thoughts and emotions still arise, but they don't stick. They're weather patterns in the sky of awareness. Your reactivity decreases. When someone criticizes you, there's no one identified with being criticized. The words are heard, maybe some emotion arises, but there's no collapse into I'm being attacked. I need to defend myself. Your fear of death decreases or disappears entirely because what's going to die? The body will die, obvious. The thoughts will cease, fine. But the awareness itself, what could kill it? It was never born, it has no substance to destroy. These are the markers. These are the ways you know whether recognition has stabilized or whether you're just holding a belief. Ask yourself honestly, has your suffering decreased significantly? Is your reactivity less automatic than it was a year ago? Is your fear of death diminishing? If the answer is no, if you're still suffering at the same level, still completely reactive, still terrified of death, then you haven't achieved the kind of stabilized recognition that would warrant calling yourself chosen in any meaningful sense. In the Sufi tradition, the sheikh would often assign tasks designed specifically to humiliate the nafs, the ego self, to break down the seeker's investment in being special or spiritually advanced. These safeguards existed because every genuine tradition recognized the danger of spiritual pride, the tendency of the ego to colonize even the highest teachings and use them for self-aggrandizement. The modern spiritual marketplace has no such safeguards. Anyone can make a YouTube channel. Anyone can claim to be teaching spiritual truth. Anyone can gather followers by telling them they're chosen ones without having done any of the work themselves. And the people consuming this content have no framework for discrimination. They don't know the difference between genuine teaching and spiritual entertainment. They don't know how to assess whether someone is speaking from realization or just parroting concepts they've heard elsewhere. So the blind lead the blind, and everyone involved believes they're on a spiritual path when really they're just circulating within a closed loop of confirmation bias and wish fulfillment. Breaking out of that loop requires brutal honesty. It requires asking yourself, what has actually changed in my consciousness? Not what do I believe, not what concepts have I collected, not what identity have I adopted, but what has fundamentally transformed in the quality of my awareness and the character of my life. If the honest answer is nothing or very little, then you need to recognize you've been consuming spiritual entertainment, not doing spiritual work. And that recognition, painful as it might be, is actually the beginning of genuine practice. Because genuine practice starts with seeing clearly where you actually are. Not where you believe you are. Not where the chosen one videos tell you are, but where you actually are. And for most people, the honest assessment is, I'm still caught in identification with thought. I'm still reactive. I'm still driven by unconscious patterns. I'm still suffering. I'm still afraid. I'm still seeking validation. I'm still trying to be special. That's the starting point. That's what needs to be transformed. And the transformation doesn't happen through belief. It happens through practice, daily practice, consistent practice, practice that gradually builds the capacity for sustained awareness, practice that slowly dissolves the identification with thought, practice that incrementally reveals the space of awareness in which all experience arises. What does this practice look like in ordinary life? It looks unglamorous. It looks like sitting every day even when you don't feel like it. It looks like catching yourself when you're identified with a thought pattern and gently returning to awareness. It looks like choosing ethical action even when it's inconvenient. It looks like watching your reactions without immediately acting on them. It looks like gradually building the capacity to remain as awareness in the middle of increasingly challenging circumstances. None of this is spectacular. None of this makes you feel chosen. None of this gives you a story to tell about your cosmic significance. But this daily, unglamorous, consistent practice is what actually transforms consciousness. This is what actually leads to freedom. This is what every realized being has done, in some form, to achieve realization. The path is simple, not easy, but simple. Recognize your nature as awareness. Return to that recognition again and again when you lose it. Build the stability to remain as that awareness even in the middle of life. Continue until the recognition is so stable that it becomes your default mode of being rather than something you access occasionally. That's it. That's the path. Spiritual traditions have developed thousands of specific techniques and practices to support this basic process, but the core remains the same. Recognize what you are and stabilize in that recognition. And that process has nothing to do with being chosen. It has everything to do with being willing to see clearly and practice consistently. Yesterday, we went deep into karma and rebirth, showing you the mechanism by which actions create imprints that drive future becoming. We showed you how that wheel turns, how it perpetuates itself, how suffering propagates through lifetimes. We're not going to rehash all of that today. You can watch yesterday's video for the full breakdown of those mechanics. But understanding that mechanism is essential to understanding why the chosen one narrative is so hollow. If you're still on the wheel, if your consciousness is still driven by unconscious karmic patterns, if you're still being born and dying according to forces you don't control, then you haven't transcended anything. You're still in the same position as everyone else, still subject to the same laws, still creating the causes for future suffering. The only way off that wheel is through the kind of practice that transforms consciousness at its root. The kind of practice that dissolves the karmic seeds before they can sprout. The kind of practice that eventually leads to such clarity and stability of awareness that the wheel itself loses its grip. And that practice is available to you right now. You're conscious, and consciousness has the capacity to recognize itself. That capacity is universal. That capacity is your birthright as a conscious being. But actualizing that capacity requires work, requires dedication, requires the willingness to let go of every comforting illusion, including the illusion that you're special. The path asks everything of you. Your certainty, your comfort, your identity, your need to be significant, your cherished beliefs about who you are and who you're meant to be. All of it has to go into the fire. What emerges is the recognition that there never was a person to be chosen. There was only consciousness, appearing as a person, and then recognizing its own nature. That recognition is the treasure. That recognition is what sets you free. And that recognition is completely unavailable as long as you're invested in being special. So you have a choice to make. Continue consuming content that tells you you're chosen, that confirms your specialness, that gives you a spiritual identity to wear. Stay in the comfortable fantasy where you're cosmically significant without having to do any actual work. Or let it all go. Drop the need to be special. Face honestly where you actually are. And begin the real work of transformation. One path feels good temporarily, but leads nowhere. The other path is difficult and demanding, but leads to actual freedom. Which do you choose? If you're choosing the path of genuine practice, if you're ready to let go of spiritual fantasy for spiritual reality, subscribe to this channel. We're going to keep making content that cuts through the marketplace garbage and points to what's true. We're going to keep showing you the difference between belief and realization, between spiritual identity and spiritual freedom. And leave a comment with your honest reflection. What are you willing to give up to be free? Not what you think you should say, but what's true for you right now. Are you willing to give up the fantasy of being special? Are you willing to do the unglamorous work of practice? What's your real commitment level? Drop that below, because understanding your actual commitment level, not your imagined commitment level, not what you wish your commitment level was, but what it actually is, that's essential information. That's what determines whether you'll make progress on this path or spend another decade circulating through spiritual concepts without transformation. The chosen one narrative is everywhere because it meets a deep human need. The need to matter, to have significance, to be more than just another person living and dying without cosmic importance. And the spiritual marketplace has figured out that you can get millions of views by telling people they're special without requiring anything of them. But real spirituality has nothing to do with confirming your ego. Real practice has nothing to do with collecting identities. Real awakening has nothing to do with becoming special. You are not chosen. Your consciousness appearing as a person just like everyone else. The consciousness is the same. The appearance is unique but not special. And the work of awakening is available to you. Consciousness, recognizing itself, is the fundamental possibility of existence. That work is demanding. It requires ethics, concentration, and insight. It requires practices that reshape consciousness at the most fundamental level. It requires guidance from those who've completed what you're attempting. It requires time, years, probably decades of consistent practice. The work is unglamorous. The work won't make you feel immediately special. In fact, it will probably make you feel quite ordinary as you recognize that what you thought made you unique was just common human experience dressed up in spiritual language. But the payoff is real freedom, freedom from suffering, freedom from compulsive reactivity, freedom from fear of death, freedom from the exhausting project of maintaining and defending a separate self. That freedom is what Buddhahood means. That freedom is what transcending the wheel means. That freedom is what every genuine tradition points toward. And when you achieve that freedom, if you achieve it, because there's no guarantee, because it depends on effort and practice and grace, when you achieve it, you won't care about being chosen. The entire framework of chosen versus not chosen will be revealed as a construct that never had any ultimate reality. There will just be this, just consciousness, just awareness, just freedom. No one to be chosen, no one to do the choosing. Just the infinite appearing as the finite and recognizing itself in the mirror of manifestation. That's the destination. That's what's worth working toward. And the first step is letting go of the fantasy that you're already there. You're not there. You're here. And here is perfect, exactly as it is, for beginning the path. The path doesn't require you to be chosen. It requires you to be willing. Willing to see clearly, willing to practice consistently, willing to let every cherished illusion burn in the fire of awareness until only truth remains. Are you willing? That's the only question that matters. Not am I chosen, but am I willing? Because willingness is the only prerequisite. The capacity is universal. The path is mapped. The destination is assured for those who complete the journey. But completion requires walking. And walking requires putting one foot in front of the other, day after day, until the distance is covered. No one can walk it for you. No video can give you the attainment. No belief can substitute for practice. And no amount of chosenness can bypass the work. The work is the path. The path is the work. And it begins the moment you stop looking for cosmic confirmation of your specialness and start looking directly at the nature of consciousness itself. That's what we're pointing to with this channel. Not spiritual identity, not cosmic status, not chosen one fantasies, just truth, just freedom, just the direct recognition of what you are beneath all the stories, all the identities, all the ego's projects. And that recognition, when genuine, when stabilized, when it transforms your entire mode of being, that recognition is worth more than every chosen one video ever made. Because it's real. And it sets you free. That's what we're doing here. That's what every video is pointing toward. Not making you feel special, making you free. And if that's what you're seeking, if you're tired of spiritual fantasy and ready for spiritual reality, then you're in the right place. Stay with us. Do the work and discover what's true beyond all the narratives about who you are and who you're supposed to be. What remains when all those narratives dissolve is infinitely more interesting than being chosen. Freedom. And freedom is what you are, what you've always been, waiting only for recognition to show itself. Consciousness is what you are. And consciousness, recognizing itself, is the simplest, most natural thing in existence. It's always already happening. You're just learning to notice. That's the real teaching. That's the real path. That's what sets you free. Everything else is noise. And you don't need noise. You need truth. So stop looking for confirmation that you're chosen. Start looking directly at what's looking. Start practicing. Start walking the path and see for yourself what's true. That's the invitation. That's what's available. And it has nothing to do with being chosen and everything to do with being willing to see. The rest takes care of itself.